Welcome everybody to Lean Innovation Educators Summit. My name is Jerry Engel. I'm the chairman and organizer of the summit, and I have the opportunity to tell you that we're going to have a busy schedule for the next 3 hours, and I'll be revisiting this schedule so you don't have to go through it in detail now. I do want to extend welcomes on behalf of my co-hosts, Steve Lang, Pete Newell, Steve Weinstein, who are all with us throughout the day and have worked with me to create this agenda and to, over the years, create the content that we all teach. We have also with us today 21 discussion group leaders. As you may know from having participated before, a key element of this program is to learn from each other. This is a program organized by educators for educators, and we will be having a substantial portion of our time devoted to talking to each other in small groups and then reporting out on what we've learned. So thank you to our discussion group leaders. Also, thank you to our organizing sponsors, the Common Mission Project, which is really the backbone of our capability to do this, and VentureWell and GCEC that help us with outreach to communicate our message. So your participation is key. Please use the chat stream to present questions as we go along. It's going to be monitored by Emily McMahon. Please keep your microphones on mute. And if you have any problems, check in with us either through the chat stream or through email. That is support@commonmission.us. So why are we here? We started this summit program out of a desire to maintain and enhance the community that the National Science Foundation helped us initiate when they built the I-Corps program. And we had our annual faculty meetings sponsored by the National Science Foundation. Those meetings demonstrated to us the importance of learning from each other. So after the NSF stopped sponsoring those annual meetings, we felt, let's recreate them and see if there was interest. And in December 2019, we hosted an in-person meeting that had over 100 participants travel from all over the country and indeed the world to come together in Silicon Valley for a few days and do best practice sharing. Then COVID hit and we went online and we upped the ante to meeting every 6 months. So this is a semi-annual series and this is the 4th one. You see on the screen the topics we've addressed historically, first in establishing our community and doing our own customer discovery to make sure this was a worthwhile activity. Then looking at the response to COVID-19, both in the classroom and in getting out of the classroom, and practicing our craft of customer discovery in a virtual world, in a virtual mechanism. We've also really taken a hard look at diversity and inclusion, which is going to be an ongoing topic and challenge for all of us as educators. And starting with the last session, we started to focus on economic recovery in the United States and globally, very disparate situations. And we heard from Lee Bollinger last time, president of Columbia University, about his view of the role of the university and entrepreneurship education in being an active interface between the university and society. So for this session, the topics we propose are leaning into the new normal, adapting remote, hybrid, and in-classroom education. How is that going to evolve? And what does getting out of the building continue to look like as we get back into the building in a way, and then have the opportunity for more hybrid relationships? What do we think they'll look like? Then there's the teaching process itself. The ongoing process of training and recruiting instructors, mentors, and advisors, evolving our curriculum. Business models are changing in the real world. The funding environment is radically changing. How does that change our situation? We'll address some of that today. And then, of course, entrepreneurship and COVID. What does it mean to be an entrepreneur in a COVID recovery mode? And with Laura Tyson today, we're going to look in depth at dual purpose entrepreneurship. Profit with a purpose, the role of public-private partnerships, the role of market activity with a purpose. Again, in the context, of course, always of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So thank you, Laura, for being with us. But before I introduce you, let's introduce the group and let's discover together who's here. So this is what the stats look like if we just say who's here. Well, 800 people signed up from 250 institutions from 66 countries. Now, we all know maybe everybody who signed up isn't in the room. So we have a poll to ask. Where are you dialing in from? So here's your poll, 30 seconds to respond, and we'll see who's actually in the room. And it looks like we have about 10% from Europe, 5% from South America, 4% from the Middle East. You have 10 more seconds to respond. Wow, we have over 250 people responding, 232 to be exact, approaching 250. Oceania, I want to know who's from Oceania. That must be Australia, but let's find out. 3% from Oceania. Okay, let's end the poll. Okay, so if we can share that, please. Okay, we see that it's not truly all the United States, which I'm really glad. Yes, it's a majority, but we have good representation from other parts of North America, good representation from South America and Europe and Middle East. And I'm going to call on the individual who identified as Oceania to please say hello. Unmute yourself and say hello.
Hey, Jerry, it's Jamie Watson down here from Common Mission Project in Australia, and we've got a couple others in the meeting this morning as well.
Fantastic. Welcome.
Right.
Welcome. The second and last question is, are you a first timer, or is this your first, second, or third time, or fourth time, pardon me, first, second, third, or fourth time? And we'll see how many of us are really building a community and been here before, and how many of us are being welcomed for the first time. We only have 10, I'm going to keep it open 10 more seconds. We have 215 respondents, 220, 230. Okay, done. So it looks like about half of us have been to our sessions together before. 22% are for the second time. Okay, and 15% are brand new. So 1 out of 8 of us are brand new, and so welcome. And we look forward to this ongoing discussion. Great, so we really have familiarity. A large part of us have real familiarity with this process and see it worthwhile. That's very rewarding to see. Thank you for being here. So what are we going to talk about, and what's our process? With Laura, we're going to do our fireside chat, which will begin in just a few seconds. Then we have a panel of your peers. We've asked 4 of your peers to join us in a respondents panel. So the hosts and the 4 we'll have 8 of us together, if you will, in a panel discussion that will respond to what we hear from the discussion with Laura and call out lessons learned that we might want to delve into more deeply in our small group discussions. And then we'll drop into our small group discussions and have report outs from those. And when we're all done after the session, hopefully we'll develop a white paper on lessons learned that we can share back. So again, the pulsing is quick, and it's my job to keep us on track. So I would love to introduce Laura. Hi, Laura, welcome.
Hello, thank you.
I'm going to embarrass you a little bit, and then I promise not to do this again. But I warned you, I was wanted to pay due respect to your wonderful career and your great contributions. And I did pull together a biography on you, And, I saw two overriding themes, and it was, of course, education and public service. And wait a minute, I'm a little disoriented right now because you're not highlighted on my screen. I can't find you. You're just a face.
You can find me. I'm here.
Oh, there you are, Laura. I found you.
Me.
I have you're there, and I'll highlight you so I'll spotlight you for everybody there. So hopefully everybody can find you in the upper left. There you go. So anyway, I know you from our time together at the Haas School of Business at the University of California, Berkeley, where I was leading the entrepreneurship program, and you were my dean and very supportive of being an innovator in education and supporting this emerging field of entrepreneurship. It was emerging back in the 90s and giving it formal recognition in the university. So that's my thank you to you for that professional experience. And that's how I know you. But your background is so much broader than that. So I just wanted, for the background of the 250 people in the room, just let them know that Laura Tyson is an influential scholar of economics and public policy and an expert on trade and competitiveness, who's also served as a presidential advisor. She is a distinguished professor of the Graduate School of the Haas School of Business at the University of California, Berkeley. She chairs the board of trustees of UC Berkeley's Blum Center for Developing Economy, which aims to develop solutions to global poverty. She is the former faculty director of the Berkeley Haas Institute for Business and Social Impact, which she launched in 2013. And she also serves as the interim, she served as the interim dean at the Haas School of Business. And husband in the recruiting of our current dean. Laura Tyson, in her public role, you might know her as being a member of President Clinton's cabinet between 1993 and 1996. She served as chair of the President's Council of Economic Advisors from 93 to 95, and as director of the White House National Economic Council from 95 to 96. As a footnote, she was the first woman to ever serve in those positions. Laura also serves on a number of boards and as an advisor to CEOs around the world. Thank you for joining us, Laura Tyson.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jerry. I'm happy to be with you.
Laura, as an opening question for you, when you look at public service through education and public service in government, and you look at where we are today in a moment of inflection because of COVID, because of political transitions in the United States, and we're in a moment of a real need for leadership. You've been a leader in these two different domains. Can you reflect on your history and where you've seen these kinds of stresses in society and where you've seen leadership make a contribution, all leading to the question, how can we as leaders individually in our classrooms, create a constructive and helpful environment?
Well, that's a very broad and important question. You are correct to point out that the two driving motivations in my life have been an education one and a public policy one. And so I've tried from the beginning in my academic work, because there is academic hurdles that one has to accomplish to be a professor at a prestigious research university like Berkeley. Those hurdles, academic work, I tried even in that work to link my work to public policy, and not just public policy in the United States, but global public policy, trade policy, development policy. So I want to start there. I want to also start with a comment that reflects my view of your role. Entrepreneurship, Jerry Engel, and then along with Stephen Blank at a later date, really helped launch entrepreneurship at Haas. There wasn't any entrepreneurship at Haas. There was a kind of recognition that maybe we should do something. the field was not at all well developed at other universities. There was not well developed. I went to an entrepreneurship educators panel at the World Economic Forum at one point, and like 3 people showed up. I mean, it was just not a focus of education. And so I would say the thing that stands out to my mind in entrepreneurship is that we have come now to a point where, think about the new dean at Haas. Entrepreneurship is one of her priorities. She is out there searching for qualified academic faculty in entrepreneurship. That, 20 years ago, no, nothing like that. 10 years ago, nothing like that. And I do just want to underscore the role of Jerry in doing that. I see that Tom Byers is on the line as well, and I think he played a similar role at Stanford and was oftentimes involved in Berkeley. So I just want to give some recognition to the fact that this has been a long journey to create what is now a major field in business schools, a major academic field among business school faculty, a major source of interest for students. So I'll start with that. You talked about public and private as well in my life. I would say, I think this is true in many countries around the world, and it will be interesting for all of you to discuss this. The pendulum is shifting in the United States. We have gone from a period which is sometimes called neoliberal, but this notion that the state doesn't have much of a role and when it does have a role, it doesn't do it very well. So whenever you can, leave the market to solve the problems, whether they are social problems or they are private problems. So we scaled back in the United States, and I think this is true in many other countries, the role of government. What's happened here is, I think, partly because of COVID, it has become so clear that there are major social challenges, societal challenges, and challenges in an area like health, where actually the private sector is not the source of the solution. It's got to be the government working with the private sector. So we have a pendulum shift going on. And I think the Build Back Better concept in the United States is really, let's go back to where the government plays some roles that it used to play, and it did it pretty well. So I just want to start with the pendulum shift. And then let me say one other thing in terms of history here. You mentioned profits and purpose, or market activity for social challenges. I would say I was dean when Jerry was building out entrepreneurship as a serious field at Haas in the late 1990s and early 2000s. When I came back as a professor and came back from my trip to London and the wonderful experience I had sharing being dean of London Business School. When I came back to Haas, what I discovered, but it was wonderful to discover this, was an increasing interest of students in social entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship with purpose. When Jerry and I were doing this in the late 1990s, there was a little group called the Triple Bottom Line Group. Okay, so you evaluated an investment, or you evaluated a company, you evaluated an entrepreneurial idea in terms of its financial impact, its environmental impact, and its social impact. So this has now that's gone from a small part of the way we think about entrepreneurship to a very significant part. And I think so social entrepreneurship with purpose, where you combine, you're entrepreneurial, you take the profits from your enterprise and you plow it back into the social mission of the enterprise. Those are examples that we can discuss, but that's become a real shift, I think, in terms of interest. I had to laugh. So in 2007, when I came back and I started to begin to put together this Institute for Business and Social Impact, I discovered that some of the major business schools around the world were saying they were social impact. I remember walking down the street in San Francisco and seeing a sign that said Wharton is social impact. I said, really? Wharton is social impact? This is news to me. But but everybody was grabbing that because of student interest. I think because of student interest. And I think I just want to emphasize, we can talk about that. That's again, it's public and private. I would put it's private also in terms of profit and nonprofit. So we got to make that distinction as well. Okay, public, private, and then within private, profit, nonprofit, and for-profit. A lot of these enterprises are nonprofit, but they make profits and they plow them back into their mission. So those are some. Let me mention one last thing: the explosion of interest in the investment community on impact. I'm trying to. Jerry, can you hear me?
You're okay. No, we do. We had one
Okay.
individual.
Hey, Jerry, you might want to pull down the presentation as well. I mean,
Okay, thank you.
I don't need to look at my picture anymore. That's for sure.
You got it. Thank you.
It's too dated anyway. So what was the last point I was going to say? Oh, I wanted to link all of what we're going to discuss today to the rise of interest in what I will just call impact and sustainable investing, because there's a lot of money that's gone into private equity, more money going into venture capital, and certainly a lot of money going into public equities, motivated by investor desire to have impact. And this has an implication for entrepreneurs, both in terms of their access to venture capital or private equity, but also should they decide to go public at some point, the IPO, a lot of them are looking for ESG validation. They're looking for, okay, yes, we do have impact. This is how we are going to help reduce carbon. This is how we are going to deal with diversity. We're a model for dealing with. So I just want to say that's another new trend. That's interesting also because it's public and private. The missions are public missions in a way. The environment is a public mission, okay? We get solutions partly through government policy, tax policy, regulation policy, et cetera, but also through private activity like startups and new companies. I just joined the board of a new company. It started out as a small company, venture capital finance, private equity finance, went through an IPO just a couple of weeks ago in the alternative energy space, renewable energies. And I know that story partly from that experience. So let me stop there, give you some ways of thinking about public and private.
Thank you, Laura. That's very instructive. Let's put that in a frame of an educator. From my experience in going through those topics with you, I saw a lot of leadership come from the students. In other words, you talk about government, yes, private, public, private as a partnership. There's also leadership student, if you will, as a partnership.
Yes, absolutely.
The themes you're mentioning about double bottom line, triple bottom line, investment with a purpose. I remember Sarah Olson, to call out a name.
Sarah Olson, right.
Coming forward as being the student who came into my office and said, we have to do something here in social entrepreneurship. And I said, pardon me, would you tell me what that is? And so likewise, 5 years before that, another student had come in my office and said, we have to do something about developing a competition. And I said, it's already been done, right? So like the students were bringing the idea forward.
Yeah.
And then the institution, that I was a gateway to the institution as an educator. So I'm just thinking in general, everybody in this room is a funnel or a gateway between individual initiative, individual creativity in our students, and the institution, which is the university or our context, and then government, if you will, because institutions then, through their research and their teaching, broadly disseminate and impact government. So now we see market activity for a purpose, and we see ESG funds actually outperforming, the standard market indices. This whole thing is coming around now, 20 years later. aha, brand new thing. And can you comment more, if you will,
Yeah.
on that process of how you see change happen and how we as educators participate in that process?
Well, first of all, it indeed was, I was the dean of 2 major business schools. I had the honor to do it, the Haas School of Business, London Business School. I would say, without question, that the most interesting ideas for changes in curriculum, for additional courses, for organizing the curriculum in ways that for students, weekend modules, evening modules, all those things, those
Laura locked up for a moment.
things came significantly from students. Oh, am I here now?
Yeah, you are.
You're
You're
now?
back.
Yes. Yes. So so I'm just agreeing with your point, Jerry, and saying, like, you all should use your students. They're the sources of really good ideas, and they can help you get them done because they actually want to do it. So it's like the process is a co-creation process. One of the things that we created at Haas with, I think, Sarah and others, Sarah Olson, we had a global social venture competition. It was global. It lasted for 25 years. It actually, there were a number of student teams around the world who got to participate in this thing, which the students helped create. And so that's number one. And also I would say courses as well, because one tends to, I don't know the various departments in which all of you function, but there's always a tension between what is core and everybody has to take that to get the degree, and what is elective, and how, and who's getting competition among faculty for electives. So is an ongoing issue, I would say. Jerry can speak to that maybe, but I would say certainly my experience was that I had to be really champion these kinds of classes to get them to the curriculum, to create space.
Mm-hmm. So you're locking up a little bit, Laura.
There is the issue of the academic faculty. Go ahead. Sorry. Let me stop there. Jerry, let me back to you. Can you hear me?
Okay.
I don't understand this. Hello?
Yeah, no, I think we got the content, but you did lock up a little bit. So you were speaking to the conflict and tension between core and elective, and between introducing new material. And I think that's very central to this group, because a lot of us are at universities where our course, the one we teach, is generally an elective, and it's generally a new entrant into the curriculum, may even be under a temporary number, if you will, not yet adopted as a permanent course. And this is the thing we're teaching. And everybody in this room, the 250 of us, are teaching it in a way that Steve Blank has championed and authored, which is the customer discovery lean launchpad method. So even within our discipline of entrepreneurship, while it's an emerging and very powerful method, it's not the old way of doing it. It's the new way of doing it. So everybody in this room can, in fact, relate to that institutional comment that you made about, being a bit of a champion and a bit on the frontier. Moving to our students' experience, many of our students are in environments that have suffered real economic chaos and regression, if not depression, because of COVID. Some of us are in more robust technology markets. So you have this Main Street versus technology sort of tension. And as educators, we deal with both contexts. And sometimes it's difficult when you have them in the same classroom, right? Because you're teaching the same curriculum and people have different scope of opportunity and different challenges. You've seen this in government as well, when you've had sectors of an economy that are booming and other sectors that need supplemental support. And when you put that lens of leadership into your educational lens, any insights for us about how to support our students who are trying to be innovators, profits for a purpose, investment vehicles for a purpose, and how they should communicate to the more established, mindsets, and how do they communicate this passion they have in an effective way so they can get the resources they need to be impactful and powerful. Any advice for us to guide our students?
All right, Jerry, I think there were really two areas of question there, and let me talk to both of them, because first you talked about the uneven impact of COVID and the fact that different communities have been affected differently. And I think I want to start with that one, because one of the things that I have been very involved in the state of California, but this is true all over the world, is that small businesses were hit the hardest, and a number of those, they are entrepreneurial. Most of those businesses, we don't, they're owned by the person who founded them. They have a market. They were clobbered. They were absolutely clobbered. We do not have very good systems for access to capital for those kinds of businesses. So I would say one thing in the public policy area where I think all of us are working is to try to convince, and I think the message is getting through, by the way, to the Treasury Department, to the Small Business Administration, to the Small Business Administration of the state of California, which lies in its business division. We're trying to make sure that there is funding for small businesses, and those are entrepreneurial businesses. It's different from the VC funding. But boy, there are a lot of possibilities out there for reviving the economy by supporting small businesses through finance. And there's a lot of stuff that government can do, because the traditional financial institutions tend to not, it's just not in their interest to serve loans to these kinds of businesses. It's just not. So basically, let's say they have an incentive structure, it's fine, they're doing very well, they don't have an interest in lending. So different countries are handling this differently. And I would say that for anyone involved in the field of entrepreneurship in the university, that's an important area to think about in terms of public policy. So that's one part of your question. The other part of your question, I think, had to do with advice on, well, I think it had to do with advice on social entrepreneurship. And I would say in general, I'm going to answer it by going to what do educators in entrepreneurship need to do to serve their students. This is not a traditional academic field, and I've never really believed that you can learn entrepreneurship by reading the best academic papers on entrepreneurship. I think you should read them. I don't have any problem with them, but I think that, so the successful entrepreneurship education is going to require projects, it's going to require internships, it's going to require networks. Networks are really important, because, for example, networking the students in entrepreneurship to the students who are working on impact investing, that's really important, because it turns out the impact investing students are bringing in the money, they're searching for the entrepreneurial ideas, they're connecting. Okay, so I would say that it's all of those things which educators in entrepreneurship have to do. In addition to, as you said, Jerry, there's a standard curriculum approach now, and that's great. And it's been developed over many years, and it is successful and important. But connected to that are all of these other things.
And those things are very, very important. Part of our process is, of course, to involve the community and advisors and mentors, and the engineering students, and et cetera. A lot of our programs, a lot of the faculty here in this group are actually in the engineering school faculty or other clinical practices, medicine, et cetera. and bringing, these techniques to their practices. So
I once heard from someone on this phone, but I won't say who because it's not fair. Schools that have strong, good relationships between engineering and business, boy, you are a real advantage in terms of entrepreneurship. Okay, Berkeley has one, and so we've not had this tension between, well, it's good, it's a business school thing. We get the money for entrepreneurship. We are not doing. And so I just want to emphasize, I agree, the importance of linking to other. And another one on the Berkeley campus is public health. We have a very, very strong school of public health. A lot of the entrepreneurial ideas are in the health area, and that will continue to be the case given the demographics of the world. It's going to be the case. So linking the entrepreneurship to these very powerful research units on the campus in technologies is very useful. Yeah, engineering and health, I think, completely.
So that's great advice, that we need to be looking within the university and outside the university for connections and network. So now I'm going to ask you to tell us what's going to happen in the future, Laura.
Oh, okay.
We have 3 minutes. We have 3 minutes left, so you have to put on your,
Oh my goodness! All right.
your futurist hat.
Okay.
And I mean, economists are supposed to, not just tell us what happened, but what happens coming forward. We're entering, in a global way. We see disparate growth rates across the world where different people have been impacted. I just saw colleagues join. I'm monitoring the stream of people coming in the room. We just had a number of people join from Brazil and other places that are having, still in very tough moments economically and health-wise. And we have other places, and we just had colleagues join from Egypt and the Middle East, where they're having a very different experience and access to vaccines, et cetera. So we have this disparity in the world and the risk of sort of chaos for a while as things settle down. But if you look to the future in a US domestic sense and in a global sense, what are you telling what are you telling the president of the United States today? I mean, and I know you're talking to these people. What are you telling them that we can endure?
Such a big question, Jerry. A couple of things. Number one, I think right now, and I'll speak to the US here, but I suspect it's true every place. There is really the very best macroeconomists are uncertain, and they're willing to express the fact that they're uncertain. I just read a really fascinating piece by one of the best macroeconomists we have in the country, Jason Furman. He was the chair of the Council of Economic Advisors under Obama. And he says, I think we know a couple of things right now in the economy. Once the vaccinations free people up and the lockdown is eased, demand comes back very fast. In fact, people start buying things. It's pent up demand. It's like after World War II. Okay, pent up demand. There's a huge explosion of demand. So there's not a problem on the demand side of the economy. Okay. The problem is on the supply side of the economy because of slowdowns in production during COVID, running down of inventories to deal with demand as it came back. The fact that we still do not have everyone coming back into the labor force who was in the labor force. Supply is not responding as fast as demand. That's it, okay? And so there is upward pressure on prices. And the question is that temporary or permanent? I would say economists differ on that. I'm probably I'm in the temporary school. I believe that supply is going to catch up. This is a little bit lagged, and that'll be, yes, it'll be fine. But for the world, what I'd say, the reason I put this as a world phenomenon is if that's not the case, we may be at an inflection point in interest rates around the world. We had 30 years of completely unexpected by economists, by the way, decline in real interest rates to essentially negative terms. That's going to turn around. And the question is, how fast does that turn around? And what are the implications of that for finance of entrepreneurship, finance of countries' balance sheets, finance of corporate balance sheets? So I would say rather than, I'm not going to make a prediction. I told you where I am on this. I'm of the view it's going to be transitory and we're okay. That interest rates are going to remain relatively low. We'll get an increase in inflation that will be short-lived. I think that the other thing I guess I want to emphasize here for entrepreneurs, for the educators, is I think there are some changes in COVID that are real and therefore we have to think about business organization around them. One is hybrid. One is absolutely hybrid, work from home. How much do you work from home? That's it. Two is e-commerce, blowing away regular commerce. I just think that is going to continue. I don't. Those two trends, it strikes me. And third, related to this a little bit, very early on, is the use of artificial intelligence in business models. How you can use data to model products and services that become highly unique to the user. So, and I'm going to end with a positive note here. There is a reason to believe that at least the large companies, the very large companies around the world, I've just did a McKinsey report on this, have taken changes, are continuing to take changes, which are going to increase productivity. And so this is really good news. If there's going to be an increase in productivity growth, unlike the period of time after the end to the Great Recession of 2008, where productivity growth was very weak, this is going to be strong. That will help everyone. That's going to help the entrepreneurs. It's going to help the macroeconomists. It's going to help the interest rates will stay down because the economy can grow faster. So I'm going to be optimistic and say that the investment which has been going on by the big companies in changing business models and investing in AI, in changing to sort of commerce and hybrid, that those things can be mirrored and adopted and affect the small scale enterprises and entrepreneurs. And entrepreneurs should be aware of all those things when they're thinking about where to put their product or service.
Boy, that's a challenge for all of us. And I bet everybody in the room is going to want to discuss that in depth. Laura, you've given us so much to work on. You've given us, different business models to think about, different ways to bring value, different, the impact of financing, the impact of government policy, and leveraging government resources for private purpose, and us being entrepreneurs and championing that and giving it direction. You wanted to make a comment?
I want to say one thing because this is really relevant. I want you all to discuss this. I was at a high-tech event in the Valley, Silicon Valley. And one of the leaders in online education was pretty much saying, the end of great research universities is over. The end of universities is over. It's not an efficient way to generate information or I actually said very publicly, this is a ridiculous statement. But I think we need all to discuss. We need to make sure that we believe that what we offer in our classrooms is better than what can be offered through an online course or two that you just pick up and add to your resume. If it's not, the future for us is, forget it. The online courses, business resume courses will win. So I challenge all of you to make sure you think that you're delivering content and education in a way which beats hands down this online delivery. You can use online delivery for your stuff, but you don't want to be pushed out by the online delivery courses.
So the big challenge, Laura, the big challenge. With that, I won't rephrase that because I think your words stand the very best. With that, let's all give Laura Tyson a round of applause and thanks and appreciation for your.
Thank you, Jerry. It's been a pleasure working with you for many decades, Jerry. I'm happy to be helpful. Good luck in your conversations.
It's my honor. Thank you very much, Laura.
All right, thank you.
So I think that's given us a great charge and a great mission pardon me as I hesitate. There we are. And hopefully I haven't left the meeting. you all, it's great as educators. I can be a little transparent about the process because we all do this every day, right? Lead seminars on Zoom, the new skill. So I hope you enjoyed Laura's remarks. I'm going to, rather than regurgitate or go into them myself, I'm going to invite our panel of respondents, Michael Camp of Ohio State, Jim Hornthal of Berkeley, Brandy Nagel of Georgia Tech, Ivy Schultz of Columbia, joined by Steve, Pete, and Steve in a discussion of what we heard. And I'm not going to give you folks any time to prepare because you knew this was coming at you. So if our organizers would highlight, I see you're all highlighted. That's fantastic. Brandy, I'm going to come to you first. What did you hear as a challenge? And first of all, I'm sorry. I should let the panel introduce themselves first. So Brandy, would you just answer the question this way, if you would, please? You know, who are you and why are you here, if you will, in 60 to 120 seconds?
Hi, I'm Brandy Nagel of Georgia Tech. Right now I'm with the Minority Business Development Agency of Atlanta. And I joined the I-Corps program in 2012. Probably there's only one or two people on this call who've been involved with I-Corps longer than that, and that's probably Jerry and Steve, and maybe Babu.
Oh yeah, give Babu a shot. Right, and how many teams do you think you've trained?
I did count for a while. I got up to about 750 or so, and then I stopped counting.
Okay, and I'll just comment that Brandy, Georgia Tech was one of the very first schools to institute the I-Corps under the NSF championship. And Brandy was always right there and on every faculty team and made those programs work and made sure we came away with lessons learned. And thank you for that. Michael Camp, who are you and why are you in the room?
Great. Hey, Jerry, good to be with you today. Yeah, what a great talk by Laura. Hey, I am Michael Camp. I'm with the Ohio State University, although Jerry forgot the on the Ohio State University on the slide, but just to call it out. Sorry about that, Jerry.
So I'm a graduate of the Penn State University.
There you go.
Call it that either.
Yeah, no, I am the academic director and principal investigator for the I-Corps at Ohio program. In Ohio, it functions as a statewide node, not officially, but as we refer to it, a statewide node of the traditional NSF Teams program. We've been operating since about 2014. I also am an instructor in the Ohio State University in the College of Engineering in the Center for Design and Manufacturing Excellence for mostly the purposes of the same as I-Corps. So those of you familiar with I-Corps would know generally what we're teaching. We're in our 7th cohort in 2021 now, running approximately 20 teams, medtech and science and engineering through. So we teach I-Corps, we teach it of the canonical model that was originally developed, really very little variation, except for just logistically and how it coordinates within the scope of Ohio State. So happy to be with you and really look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Michael. And just a comment on Michael, I know him back in the days at the Coffin Foundation when he was a leader, you know, helping that organization really establish its mission. And when it had a very broad, impactful mission in entrepreneurship, and of course, his leadership since then. Jim Hornthal, who are you and why are you in the room?
Jerry pulled me into the web of entrepreneurship at Haas almost 20 years ago. And at a coffee, Steve Blank asked me to sit in and help him teach a new class, the Lean Launchpad. I thought I was going to sit in for a few hours. I didn't realize I was sitting in for 11 years. But Steve is a master at having people help him paint an important large fence. And through the engagement, we actually were part of the group that helped train Georgia Tech and Michigan in that first I-Corps initiative. Worked closely with Babu and Jerry, trying to spread the word. And since it's an international audience, Jerry, your poll pointed out, today, there's over 250 universities in 77 countries that we're aware of that have taught some version of the Lean Launchpad to over 20,000 teams. And so it's a remarkable global phenomenon that Steve Blank's late night insomnia benefited us by creating this infrastructure. And so I'm here as a proud carrier of a paintbrush.
Well done. And we co-teach together at Berkeley currently, and it's a wonderful partnership. Ivy, who are you and why are you in the room?
Hi, I'm Ivy Schultz. I'm the Director of Entrepreneurship at Columbia School of Engineering and Applied Science. I've also been an I-Corps instructor since 2014 when I was trained by you, Jerry. And I think if anyone should be innovative in education, it should be those of us teaching in innovation and entrepreneurship. I think we have, a special challenge, and I'm grateful to have the opportunity to be surrounded by so many great minds and innovators.
Fantastic. Pete Newell, who are you? Well, we know who you are, so you don't have to explain that. Tell us, welcome everybody. You're a co-host. Would you please have the floor for 30 seconds?
So I was hoping to be able to tell a story how I got here.
Oh, okay. Tell a story. Who are you and why are you in the room?
Listen, I'm an accidental entrepreneur. So I literally showed up in Silicon Valley with no business background. I probably no business in starting a business, but happened to meet Steve Blank by a student introduction who was taking a lean launchpad, and Steve and I proceeded to have a 4.5-hour discussion on a dry erase board about lean and some of the lessons I learned about searching for problems on the battlefields of Iraq and Afghanistan, and that turned into what is now known as the Hacking for Defense course at Stanford and about 60 other universities around the country. That spun out to a climate-focused program run by Steve Weinstein, to energy, to diplomacy, to I don't know what we're adding next, but we keep adding. The bottom line is we built a platform that generates problems from lots of different places and uses lean to search for solutions to them, and while building at the same time. So I'm part of the teaching team for the Stanford Hacking for Defense team class, and I'm also one of the co-founders for the Common Mission Project, one of the sponsors for this program.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Steve Blank, who are you and why are you here?
I've been asking that question my entire life, Jerry, and hopefully I'll get some answers.
Well, thanks for being here very much. Steve Weinstein, I think, had to step out of the room for a moment, so we'll proceed without him. Let me go back to my original question, which was, what did we hear? And HEAR. And I'm going to start by asking, let's say, Ivy, arbitrarily. You're in the top right-hand side of my screen. So some key challenges or takeaways. The idea of this panel being framing the discussion for the discussion groups and helping us focus on key topics we might want to look at. What did you hear?
Sure. So I think, learn by doing would be a concise way to summarize some of that message. We need to help students to be able to learn by doing. We need to make sure there are connections and interdisciplinary, that there are interdisciplinary members involved in teams or projects. And especially when many of us are coming from academia and specific schools, that can be a challenge. I think she highlighted that well. And then, the big challenge ahead is staying relevant in our universities in this world while we're virtual, and making sure that there is a real benefit to what we're doing, and that we continue to innovate in whatever way possible to make sure that it's worthwhile to come see all of us or be part of our courses or programs and all the other things. We offer so many things, but they have to remain relevant.
Michael, you want to build on any of that or bring something new to the table?
Yeah, and no, it certainly would be consistent with what Ivy shared, any of the points that I would want to make. I really took away in particular, initially as she started on the aspect of impact investing. And I got to thinking, while she was sharing, I may have missed a few of the points because I was trying to take notes, but everything we try to do has the notion of impact. Even if we're doing for-profit ventures and trying to understand the validation of scalable business models, it's for purposes of impacting. The question becomes impacting what and why? Why would such an impact be beneficial? And so I know for me, I need to constantly revisit the why I'm doing this program and whether or not I'm making the kind of differences that we originally designed in the program and where we think the model is taking us. So For me, that was one of the big challenges that I understand. I want to understand and understand better and how it impacts my program. And just to be more practical, a couple of the key considerations are, we are a high-tech focused program. We work with the IP coming out of the 22 research institutions in Ohio. So with that lens in mind, we need to understand just what impact really means, and our focus and impact is on economic growth and with respect to net new job creation for Ohio. We're funded by Ohio, our obligations are to Ohio, and we work with only Ohio institutions. So when I talk about impact, I'm always focused on economic. So now I need to understand better how that economic impact influences or has downstream impact for social impact and other cultural impacts that I might not have ever considered or have built into my approach to how we teach I-Corps.
You raise a topic I want to jump on before we move on. I've had a challenge with the term social entrepreneurship myself, and I won't digress too much on that, but I've always felt that every venture is a social venture. In other words, if you don't have a social benefit, society's going to kill you sooner or later. And Facebook, you see sort of that one, like how it was a big social benefit and then a social cost, and then do we let it survive, or do we challenge it as a monopoly? So I think you're raising that point, and that's something we can look at further. Brandy.
Hey, Jerry. So the thing I liked that I just heard was this idea of the pendulum is swinging. And what this brought to mind was a few years ago, I was doing office hours, not just at Georgia Tech, but at some of the campuses right near Georgia Tech. And so that would be Morehouse College, Spelman College, and Georgia State University. And if there's anyone from those campuses, if you just put a note in the chat, that would make me really happy. The students on all of those campuses and Georgia Tech during those office hours would come and say, I've got an idea and I want to run it as a nonprofit. And it didn't matter what it was, if it was an app, if it was online, it didn't matter what it was. So the shift that I have seen in students is a shift towards practicality. And so they're still talking about doing good, which is great. They're still talking about problems to be solved, but now they're thinking about a business model and how to make it sustainable. And that makes me very, very happy. I think it's an outcome of the pandemic and seeing real world problems in very clear focus. I hope that this is a very positive change for our students.
Sustainability in a broader context, right? Economic viability being a part of sustainability, right?
Yeah. Well, Jerry, what do you say when students come to you and say, I've got an idea for a startup and I want to run it as a nonprofit?
Well, I'll let that be for a discussion question, right?
Okay.
But thank you for asking me. Jim, what did you, what challenges did you want to?
I'm going to pick up on the pendulum, but from a slightly different angle. I think when Laura mentioned the neoliberal states role, if you take a look at two bills currently in the US, the Endless Frontier Act in the Senate and the Foundation of Futures Act, it's about doubling the size of the NSF budget. And I think the competition globally, especially with China, has become something that we all are a part of a potential solution. Saluting the work that VentureWell's done with the EU and TTA Turkey. There's interest now from the Egyptian National Competitiveness Council on finding I-Corps-like programs. And I think if you look at I-Corps in its core, the feasibility is pretty solid. The TRLs are what they're working on, the key activities, key resources. And so a lot of the challenge we've had historically has been the desirability function. What's really interesting in the work that Pete and Steve have done with hacking is they come in with a signal of desirability, that these sponsors have a sense of they all change, but at least have a sense of a signal of desirability. And a lot of the focus is on the feasibility side. So I think that depending on the flavor of the lean implementation, it tends to come in with some strengths, either left side feasibility, right side desirability. And our role as educators, I think, is to understand the nuanced differences between them. It's not a one size fits all. And I'm blown away by the work that the Stanford Hacking for Defense students showed 2 days ago, and how rapidly they get access to the key sponsors' insights to really have a high fidelity signal on desirability. So I think to Laura's point about the pendulum swing, I saw that as the role of governments, not just the US, but these other countries. Jerry, you've done work in Singapore, other countries in Europe and Spain, that it's a global need to accelerate. And the thing that Zoom's taught us, I think, is you don't have to have a mentor from the same zip code. You don't have to have team members from the same geography. Nice if you can. And I think one of the challenges is a lot of teams coming out of I-Corps with the feasibility strength and a mentor from the technical area has somehow lacked the full speed that you get if you complement that. So that I took away from that the role of government in assisting and facilitating. So without it, without Errol's work at I-Corps and Steve Blank getting it started, we wouldn't be here today.
So, and just for our global audience, when we talk about government, we tend to have a US-centric context because we're from the United States. But I know I've seen Paul Fox's in the room from Brazil, from Barcelona, and they have a whole different model where the government initiative has been to make the city the first customer, to make the city the place you can experiment with your product. That if you're an entrepreneur and you have a new innovation, you can come to the city and they may take that risk of being your first customer to be the place to try out your solutions at scale. So there are many ways that government and private-public partnerships, desirability and feasibility, government can cooperate in that. So we can learn from those models globally as well. Steve Blank, what did you hear? We don't hear you, Steve, because you're on mute.
Yeah. So I actually heard something that wasn't said, as always, because I'm always hearing voices. Some of us are old enough to remember when entrepreneurship was how to write a business plan, and that's what we taught. And the nature of entrepreneurship has now kind of expanded, way past that into all the things we've been talking about, social entrepreneurship and diversity and all these other things. And at the same time, the metaphor of the dog has caught the bus is true, is that we went from this kind of outlier of like, oh yeah, they teach this here in the corner with these crazy people, to now people are realizing that this, how to get out of the building and test hypotheses and ought to be multidisciplinary across not just business schools, but every other group. And so, I'm just imagining someone on this call should probably be the first to draw kind of a tree of life diagram with how to write the business plan on the bottom, and then maybe the concepts of lean on top of that, and all the branches that it's kind of gone into, and social entrepreneurship and climate change and diversity and all the other things. Just drawing that tree with the 330 people we have online would probably give us a good view of where we've ended up in most. For some of us, we've seen this radical change in our career, though it doesn't look radical when you're in the middle of it. And the other thing I want to remind everyone, for those of you in other places that are not Silicon Valley, is in Silicon Valley, we take for granted that, our students leave tripping over bags of money, as they leave Stanford. Well, that's clearly not true in most other places in the world. Well, entrepreneurship is everywhere, and maybe seed funding is available everywhere, but still risk capital at scale, raising $100 million in a locale is not everywhere still. And so understanding that the future is here, it's just not evenly distributed, as someone once said, is also true about entrepreneurship. So one is this kind of tree of life of where we started and where we are, and two is this recognition is that it's the recognition of entrepreneurship and its all its complexity is still not evenly distributed in every school and university, both in the US and worldwide. So that's my takeaway, Jerry, of what wasn't said, but what I was thinking about is listening to all of you.
As always, Steve, you added another challenge. You do this all the time. Okay, everybody grab their paintbrush, to use Jim's analogy, okay? And by next summit, we will have the beginning of this tree, and we'll add to it as we build out our experiences together. That's a fantastic challenge.
I will give out a personal reward for those of you who submit these, and we'll probably pick the best tree of life and maybe have a contest online for the next summit. So literally,
I will publish
the tree of entrepreneurship. Yeah.
I'm just going to say, we'll publish it in our white paper. No problem.
Right.
Okay, Pete, You got to bring us home a little bit. We're at a couple minutes. We're going to close this discussion in 4 minutes. So you get to be the last person on this round. What did you hear?
Does that mean I get all 4 minutes?
No, you get 60 seconds. Go.
Ah, that's too bad. So like Steve, I think my comment is about something I didn't hear. And I'm probably a good example of, particularly as the American population gets older, there are more older Americans working much longer. But what I've not seen or heard is a long discussion about re-engaging or re-energizing an older population to actually become entrepreneurs and start businesses. And I don't see it as an educational platform anywhere. And I'll admit, I started a business with no business education and earned it the hard way by being counseled by Steve Blank, Steve Weinstein, you, and a host of other people here. The reason my business doubled in size every year for 8 years, starting with year one, because I had the income and the bank accounts to let me run a company without an income for a year and a half. There are a lot of older Americans leaving the workforce looking for things to do that have sizable incomes, who have the ability to get re-engaged and start businesses. And what I say is, I love all the big tech and I love unicorns and things like that, but Main Street USA is built on the back of small businesses. And if we're talking about, I say this as I'm looking out my window at a half dismantled homeless camp in downtown Austin, creating businesses that gives people the ability to earn a respectable, sustainable wage in their communities, I think is the biggest social impact we can have. So the question is, the downstream supply chain is, where do we find the Americans and the other countries, that the untapped population that's going to do that for us? And I look at folks my age and above and say, you're sitting around on retirement funds that could be doing lots of things rather than paving more golf courses. My 60 seconds are up.
Yeah, you bet. And those were well spent, indeed. So I'm going to take 60 seconds to just thank the panel and say I've heard some calls to action around engaging in a number of ways. The engagement can be in terms of bringing social value through a great business. The engagement can be in bringing social value through a sustainable business that employs and provides opportunities for others. But in any case, the challenge for us is to do this leveraging institutions that are larger than ourselves, using the individual initiative to create organizations that either engage with major corporations, as Laura's pointing out, they're coming back with productivity. The thing she didn't point out there that she might have is that they oftentimes look for their productivity and new ideas in our entrepreneurial ventures, and that those partnerships are another engagement for leverage. So as we move to our discussion groups, we looking at how can we build experiments, these new ventures, these young people, to leverage resources, not just venture capital, but major corporations, government, social opportunities, to create the velocity to have impact. And in a world that's very unsettled, it's going to be hybrid, it's going to be virtual, it's going to be real contact sport. So how's it going to work? With that, it's time for us to move to I want to thank our panel. You've presented these challenges, I think, very concisely and really highlighted a lot of what we learned from Laura. We're going to move now into our discussion groups. And I'll share my screen one more time. Hopefully I've done that right. And these 21 groups are going to be formed. Hopefully you're seeing the names of our panelists, of our leaders. Phil Weinstein, Todd Warren, I won't read them all, but you see yourselves called out there. Wave your hand, everybody, if you're a leader, so we know you're there. Yeah, so good to see you there. Hi. And we're going to drop now into our chats, and we're going to be in these chats until for 40 minutes. In the East Coast, that's 250. In the West Coast, that's 1150. And wherever you are in the world, 50 minutes after the coming hour. And after this hour, I'm sorry, we're now at 11 minutes after the hour. We're going to be back at 50 minutes after the hour. When you come back, you're going to have a maximum of 2 minutes to report out on what your discussion group found as a learning, an extension, a recommendation, an idea, a provocative thought. And your discussion leaders are going to need your help in terms of active participation. So let's give them our support. Let's give our entire groups an opportunity to learn from all of us. So with that, let's go into our discussion groups, and we'll see you back here in 40 minutes. So welcome back, everybody. It's 1 minute after the moment, so I assume we're here. I had the opportunity to cruise around some of the rooms and participate a bit. Pete, did you have a chance to drop into any of the rooms?
I did. I floated in out of 2 or 3.
Okay, super, good. And I'm not sure if let's see if on my own screen I can pull up the hosts. Yeah, good. So I'd like to start the report outs from our experience last time. We didn't have quite enough time to really enjoy any discussion with the report outs. Everybody had to drink from a fire hose. We have increased the allocation by a few minutes for the report out times, but in general, if the moderators will plan their comments to take 2.5 minutes, we'll be able to get through everybody. Phil, I see you nodding, and your name is the first on the list. So I will take the names in order on the screen, going from Phil to Todd to Brandy, and then I'll start over to Victoria. So Phil, give us a sense. How was your room?
So we had a great discussion. We had folks from all over the place, all over the world. And we found some commonality right off the bat in terms of why we're here. Everyone pretty much was here to learn from each other, and pretty consistently, the highest value that they expected to gain from the day was in building their network and having an opportunity to build on what they did during the day during the session here in terms of making connections and generating new ideas. And we went on to talk about what they expect to be different next year. There was a lot of discussion around post-COVID going back to an in-person format, sort of validation of one of the comments in the chat about it maybe as anxiety producing to go back in person as it was to go into a virtual environment. And some discussion followed on some of the opportunities and advantages of the hybrid or of the virtual environment in terms of being able to connect with more people more readily, and some concerns as well about the effectiveness, particularly for students or folks who have not had the opportunity to build strong networks, that they may be at a great disadvantage in joining into a situation where all of the network development that they do is happening virtually, and they don't have a lot of pre-existing in-person connections and contacts that they can put to work. There was some variation on that, but agreement that a strong existing network is really critical to success in sort of doing customer discovery and in effectively using a classroom environment. There were a number of discussions about, the need to really kind of think outside the box of the university in terms of making connections to institutions. And we finally ended with a sort of go around about, well, so what about the university and is it still relevant? And I think there was a general agreement vociferously that the university is important, but its importance may be as much in its being an aggregator and a hub for connection of talent as for the formal curriculum. And that the projection is it will have a ongoing and important role in bringing together talent and opportunity. And I'll stop there.
Oh, you raised a lot of topics, and that's really solid. Thank you very much. I won't regurgitate it, but I did want to comment, ask you one follow-up, Phil. Did you get a sense whether people thought, did you get any enthusiasm for the virtual hybrid being more, the virtual being actually more effective than the in-person? Did you get a bias one way or the other?
So there were, I would say, probably a third that was strongly in the camp of the virtual actually has some real advantages to it. And that there was a desire to actually carry those advantages into going back into an in-person environment, to bring in, for example, virtual speakers so that you can continue to have world-class speakers regardless of where you are, and to encourage and train students in doing virtual interviews so that they can effectively leverage people from outside their immediate geographic area.
Thank you. Todd.
So we focused a little bit more on reacting to Laura's talk, and we really focused on public-private and the intersection there, and also local development. We had a wonderful panel that spanned from Puerto Rico to New Zealand, and as well as a bunch of us in North America. Some pointed out that especially when you look at public-private, a lot of the experience was that, especially the big programs, it has to be more than a photo op. That many of those things are focused on a photo op, and they need more grassroots and local support. So figuring out how to craft programs to do that. Dovetailing from that, a lot of people talked about how coming out of the pandemic, we need to really focus on Main Street and not just the big scale scalable ventures. Even those, we had someone in our group who was working in an incubator in Michigan with a mix of both kinds of businesses, and understanding the value in both, but that we need to keep the best of both. Related to that, another issue we talked about, especially in the regions, was how do we keep, especially as the economy heats up, like if we have a post-World War II like boom, entrepreneurship tends to historically decline a little bit in those booms. And how do we keep our best graduates engaged, especially in doing local development? And what incentives can we provide? We didn't really reach a conclusion there, but a lot of it was about how we engage other elders in the community, and we had a big discussion on looking at people as they get older and engaging those. Going into the fall, we're just looking forward to customer discovery in person and going to those watering holes of conferences, including hopefully this group.
Yeah, fantastic. Just off the wall question for you. In that discussion, you have such depth of experience in Africa. When you talk about this Main Street versus technology, did any of this resonate in terms of what you would do in third world experiences or in Africa?
Completely. I have two thoughts, both on the local development and going into the fall. I talked about, I have many wonderful students at Ashesi in West Africa, which, the business plan, back when business plans were a thing, was written, I think, in your class, Jerry. But in any case, many of those students get recruited by Goldman Sachs to work in London. We really encourage them to work locally. We do economic development there. We get them engaged in the community. That's been one of the keys to helping those students connect locally and not feeling like they have to go somewhere else. Even the ones that go to Goldman Sachs say they come back, and I've seen some of them do that. So I think it's definitely possible. The other thing I would say is having taught remotely there, which was very difficult, but a thing that we learned is we can bring in talent and engage them with people locally by leveraging this hybrid environment. And so we've shifted some funds to focus on hiring professors virtually, especially in areas of expertise that are hard for us to recruit for to get visitors. So.
Very interesting. Thank you. Brandy.
Hi. Hey, we had 4 countries represented in our group: Serbia, Austria, Argentina, and the US. And it was a great way to hear different points of view. Loved the conversation. Just a few notes I made. I think we might prefer impact entrepreneurship as the phrase rather than talking about social entrepreneurship for some of the reasons that we discussed earlier. And one of our participants in particular has taught classes where the startups must be focused around the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN. Like that's part of the core of that class, which is a great concept. We did also
Really great
talk.
hacking for it. It's sort of a hacking for thing, right?
It is,
Yeah.
right? Identify what is the problem. We talked about this idea of teaching for-profit and nonprofit, and I think I might be convinced to change my point of view that we probably should be teaching the skills required to lead a nonprofit. Most of the skills are largely the same. What might be different is in some places in the world, there's abundant funding for nonprofits. And in other parts of the world, there perhaps isn't. That might be an important deciding factor. We also did talk about the help that Main Street entrepreneurs need. And I think we agreed that business model canvas, customer discovery, all of that applies in all of these different contexts, whether it's university research, university students, or people in the community. And overall, we were a very agreeable group. We did not have big conflict.
That's always good. Grant.
All right, fantastic. So I'll echo a lot of what people have said. We had an international gathering. So we had people from Canada, Egypt, Kenya, and of course, the US. We started off talking about Laura's conversation and this idea that the pendulum is swinging, but it meant multiple things. So it started off with this discussion, much like what Brandy was talking about this impact entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship and impact programs that leverage the lean approach and how that's becoming more and more interest for people to participate. A couple of the people in the room mentioned that they were using these sustainable development goals to help drive those programs, at least provide some framing, but then use the process to find root problems. There was also, to pick up on some of the comments that Todd had, there was also discussion about this local entrepreneurship and how that's much more, important, particularly in some of the developing worlds. Again, some of the framing was from Egypt. And, I know that same thing is happening here. I saw Phil Dillard comment earlier, so shout out to him. I know he's pushing that hacking for local. But again, kind of this idea of, entrepreneurship not just being the domain of unicorns and highly scalable, but maybe tackling real problems and real environments for people was important. That led us to a discussion about funding, which is back to the pendulum swinging in terms of public-private partnerships and where does the money come from? Shared in the group that as an engineer, you learn often that boundary conditions drive solutions, right? And the funding boundary condition creates the environment for people to pursue unicorns because that's where the funding comes from. So what does the funding need to look like to support these more local versions of entrepreneurship? So we started talking about corporate investment from CSR, ESG goals, and there were some examples shared where companies have come in from telecom, where the government has provided some pressure in some environments for banks to get involved, to do some of that, to finance some of those kinds of ventures, but fund dispersion is a challenge, right? So to make sure it doesn't all get aggregated in a couple of hands and figure out how we continue to get that dispersed. There was an example in Canada where they have a proactive program to push some of that, to make sure it doesn't aggregate. So that's kind of an interesting model. And then towards the end, we started to talk about kind of what would be different as we go back, kind of change being the biggest theme. So a couple of thoughts around that. So one is the virtual intermediated activities. I think that was, I copied that down verbatim from what someone said, kind of increased activity, right? So increased efficiency. So some of that stuff is here to stay, much like other people have said, but it's also emphasized the need for social engagement. So the hybrid format is presumed to be the dominant format moving back. I don't think people are going to go entirely back to the way things were, because you can see the benefit of efficiencies, but you can't just be an avatar, right? Because there's certain things that you need to do together. And we wrap some of that into this discussion about the pressure that online universities will place on traditional brick and mortar universities. So again, we're probably both going to be doing online delivery and quite a bit of it. The distinguishing characteristics are how we can shape experiences, right, that leverage hybrid. So labs are certainly one of those experiences, but there are going to be other in non-lab, non-scientific courses where we can add value by bringing people together. So certainly the pandemic has shown people are willing to share of themselves much more broadly than we thought, and we should leverage that moving forward.
Wow. Thank you, Grant.
All right.
Tom O'Neill. Shout
Hi,
out
everybody.
to
We had a great conversation. We were international as well in scope. We had the pleasure of having a student in our room. So we got to actually pick his brain about what he likes about us curriculum and how he's doing with learning through Lean and the different people he gets exposed to. We agreed that the supply chain is an issue. We talked about that and certainly that, while there's not while smart people seem to be equally distributed around the country, that not all resources are available or distributed equally. That certain areas are certainly better access to resources than other people when it comes to getting their companies launched and getting them funded and these kind of things. We talked about the labor shortage, at least I did, from Central Florida's interest. We have a serious shortage of labor where businesses are shutting down as they can't get people to come in and work the shops. So that's an interesting dilemma we're going through as well. We talked about in systems or systems. We talked a lot about school and going back to school and how we're doing things now versus what we did before. I personally can't wait till I can get in and take a student, and make them squirm, like having them in the front room, us in the back room. I miss that. We're not sure how the hybrid's going to work when we go back to school. Certainly, we all have certain requirements to get back to on-campus present. Not all equally in all different countries. So I think that the U.S. is further along with the vaccinations and those kind of programs. It's a lot of U.S. schools seem to be more on track to get back sooner than the other schools. Virtual does have advantages, certainly with customer discoveries. I think it's unhandcuffed many people. They don't think about having to find someone locally to go see now or have to get on a plane or go to a conference. They can just connect with anyone across the world now. So it's made it very kind of a robust customer discovery. And the mentorship is much better now because people can be mentored by anybody, no matter where they are. That's been good. The COVID stuff will go away and we'll all be back to school soon. We talked a lot about the different programs we use to make our delivery better and whether the student experience has been improved or diminished or just different.
I look forward to seeing those in your comments that you submitted, some of these different solutions. That's great. Thank you.
All right.
Michael, The Ohio State University.
Yeah. Well, again, I think this is going to be a common theme. We're echoing a lot of what others have shared. So I'll really focus on the new or different aspects. But we also had a very diverse group. There were 4 countries represented, including Egypt. I think we're maybe one of the few that had someone from Egypt. So it's great to have everybody on board. Yeah, the discussion, again, focused early. We stayed focused on kind of the takeaways from Laura's presentation, as well as, the panel discussion. And probably the key thing, what I felt, there was a lot of experience in this group, a lot of teaching and programmatic leadership experience. And that really led to comments that were very deep and very personal. And sometimes you could sense that the discussion was rubbing the edge, perhaps tearing the scab off of a concern or something they've been addressing for some time. In particular, most that were teaching had experience of incorporating both social ventures and what I call for-profit or private ventures in the teaching experience, bringing them directly into a mixed classroom and teaching them at the same time. And they're it was a very good and heated in a good way, very intense discussion about the role and what the importance of doing that, and the issues associated with the fundamental misunderstanding in the language about what defines a social venture versus a non-social venture, and how the teaching of that, what we can share, and how the teaching pedagogy design actually benefits that, and then what are some of the challenges associated. And some of those have already been mentioned by the other team leaders or group leaders, in particular where funding actually comes from, what the focus on skill building really is, and as well as just simply the languaging. And one of our final comments that was made was to actually go back when we transitioned the conversation to, how does any of this impact your programs going forward, specifically, in the next few months as you go back into the classroom. There was some issues about, I'm going to literally focus on rechanging up my language and how I refer to it. And there was already reference to the notion of calling it impact investing or impact entrepreneurship instead of, social entrepreneurship. So a lot of focus on that. We then transitioned to a lot also about the new approach to learning and the challenges with universities versus non-universities. Many of our participants had experience in non-university settings as well, incorporating non-university students into their training, as well as teaching beyond the classroom, if you will, using the same, for the most part, the same content, same curriculum, but going beyond that. So a lot of good ideas in terms of how you take that forward, but also recognizing the challenges of maintaining experiential, diverse, interdisciplinary, forgetting the curriculum calendar, things like that. You can no longer just depend upon the university structure, and teaching the skills that are needed. Several comments made focused on, this is really about building the skills that will last a lifetime, not just your immediate classroom experience.
That's true education.
Yeah, a lot of great takeaways. So
fantastic. Thank you very much, Michael. I did have a chance to drop into a number of the rooms tonight. I have to say, we're just getting a taste of the highlights here. Allie.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. So my group had a lot of diverse perspectives, a fantastic discussion, and it sounds like everyone else did too. So it's really wonderful to hear. We had people from Egypt, India, Peru, and the UK. And some of the comments that resonated from Dr. Tyson's talk was that lag in supply against the increased demand as we transition out of COVID. And that as the economy opens back up, the demand goes up, but the tail end of that supply chain is really going to become the issue. And the discussion was, well, that's really now the fertile ground for entrepreneurship. So seeing how we transition back, some of the biggest gaps, for example, here, when Brexit happened, a lot of people saw that very negatively. A lot of people also saw that as a really fertile ground, again, for entrepreneurship. So that was an interesting discussion.
So Allie, was that about local sourcing then? Is the opportunity rather than,
we didn't get into specifics actually about it. So I don't know if it was about local sourcing. Sorry, Jerry.
Okay.
The other that resonated was really engaging Pete Newell's comment at the end of looking to the older population to engage in entrepreneurship, and really engaging those seasoned professionals in retirement was again an area that was really ripe and much needed across all of the people in the group, all of our educators. We talked a lot about teaching and transitioning back to teaching and lessons learned. And so in the hybrid, there were some pros and cons. And some of the pros that we talked about, again, for all of us, was increased customer discovery, that you could do so many more interviews, have so many more conversations, as opposed to doing it in person. One thing that was really interesting, in particular in India, was that this one program was able to bring students from across India into a team, as opposed to if they were still doing it in person, they would just have the students that are in that location. And so what that made possible was a greater diversity in team, but the ripple effect of those skills across geography was really important. And that led to another point in the discussion, that entrepreneurship and the drive towards the entrepreneurship curriculum is not so much anymore focused or laser focused on let's get companies and products out of this, but let's build skills. And so there's that shift to skill building versus being really focused on just building companies and products. So that was a really interesting component, that the ripple effect of skills across a geography in one country was a huge benefit, as opposed to students that just might be lucky enough to be in a city to take the class.
I just want to extract that one, Ali, because I've seen that in other contexts, that more of us are shifting away from being venture-centric to being person-centric. In terms of how we approach it. The skills are about the person, not about the venture. The venture is a secondary exercise. Not that it's not bad, but just this dynamic between the accelerator environment and the educational environment, if you will. And that's an interesting dynamic for all of us to look at. Thank you very much, Ali. Todd. Todd Bache?
Yes.
There you are.
Great. Thanks, Jerry. We had also a great discussion. We had about 12 people, 4 countries, including Egypt and Australia. So that was great. I appreciate.
Egypt was everywhere.
Yes, and Australia was just waking up, and so we helped provide a little bit of a caffeine jolt to him to get him up and going. I appreciate that he joined. It was like 4 in the morning there. We had both men and women, and a very reasonable age distribution as well. We took off from Laura's very interesting talk. I think she covered so many different areas that it's, we zeroed in on 1 or 2 of them. Most people do not identify or self-identify as an entrepreneur, not just in the US, but really around the world. People pigeonhole that. They think of it as, that's for startups, that's for high-tech people, that's not me. That's not what we do. And we said no, that really, we had a very solid discussion around that entrepreneurship is really like a way of life. It's how you approach things in your life, and it can apply to everything. Also that it's a skill for sure, but it's a skill that can be learned, even though a lot of people think, oh, I'm not entrepreneurial. Or that guy or that woman is very entrepreneurial. But I think, Blank has certainly shown to the world that there's a methodology and there's a mindset and there's a way to approach this. So it's something that can be learned, and entrepreneurship really can apply to everyone. We discussed that many people are not comfortable with entrepreneurship because they see that it involves making mistakes, and that makes people very uncomfortable, and they don't want to stick their neck out. And so getting comfortable with that process of, I think failing is too loaded a word, so we didn't use failing, but I think making mistakes or moving in a direction and then moving in a different direction. Precisely as yeah. I mean, precisely as Pete was talking about, we had one member who confessed to failing retirement, and John did a fabulous job explaining how he's really invigorated, and what would be in a classic retirement phase of life is continuing to drive and teach and really be an entrepreneur. So that really resonated with me as well.
Thank you so much, Todd. Paul.
I had one more thing that I just wanted to say. We had a great comment that entrepreneurship is like improv, where you never say no, but you just keep saying yes and that way of approaching problems is really a great shift because it broadens the context of what people associate with entrepreneurship. The final point was, what did COVID help make better, remote versus in person? I think everybody agreed, as some of the other groups have said, that customer discovery is definitely easier with remote access. You've got worldwide access to speakers and relevant people, so it unlocked a much larger pool overall.
Thank you, Todd. Paul
Thanks,
Fox
Jerry.
from Barcelona.
Okay, thanks. We talked about a bunch of things, but I really don't remember what anybody said. You didn't tell us a big feeling, so no. So we talked about the question of this synchronizing the business school and the engineering school, and the idea of multidisciplinary entrepreneurship courses, and there's kind of this perception from the engineering side, business courses are easy, engineers don't have time to do it, and how do you kind of work this out? I don't think we have a lot of answers, but we have a few. And there's a comment that most universities aren't high tech, so maybe there's some bias in this discussion to begin with. There's a suggestion to maybe call it problem solving rather than entrepreneurship, because this tends to resonate with more people in different disciplines.
I think I'd call it problem discovery before I'd call it problem solving. We actually have a course, I'm sorry, at Berkeley called problem discovery and problem solving. So I'm just saying that's a good idea.
I remember the first question I asked when you came to campus, and I asked, what about problem solution fit? And you said, that's those other guys, that's not us. So we're product market fit. And so there's a discussion about, what's the starting point? And so maybe the starting point, I mean, a little bit what Laura's saying as well, and maybe the starting point is with these challenges, the problems that need to be solved. And this might kind of generate more of, well, a better starting point, and people kind of connect with this and they have an easier way in. You start with the desirability aspect. There's a question like whether entrepreneurship is valuable for non-entrepreneurs. And obviously we're very biased because we all think it is, and we're all talking about mindset and the process and all this. But my experience has been, how do you convince students who, and the discussion was, how do you convince students who are going to work for a company that it's worthwhile to study entrepreneurship? And how do you, because once they, maybe my experience has been, once they get through the course, they maybe see why we did what we did and why it's valuable. But while they're doing it, they don't do a very good job because they're not convinced of why they need to actually go out and interview people. They feel like it's a waste of time. And so we talked about doing activities for mindset in the beginning, this type of thing. There was a discussion of, what the objective of the courses are. Is it to come up with good ideas, or is it to teach the process and the skills? And well, I think it's just there's a debate. There's also a comment that maybe it differs, these perceptions on the part of students, maybe it differs whether they're core courses versus electives. I think as I said earlier by Larry as well, whether it's undergraduate versus masters as well, how committed they are to the process. And I think this ongoing discussion about this virtual versus in-person versus hybrid. And what I notice is there's a very different discussion happening in the US versus what's happening in other countries. I mean, I'm familiar with Europe, but in the US, most people have been online. We've been in the classroom in a hybrid mode since September. So we've spent basically this whole academic year where the professor's in the classroom, and then the students could be wherever they needed to be, and they got sick, and or we're in contact with somebody and they went online, and the professors said, hey, what about me? Well, no, you have to be in the classroom. Well, but now what happens? It's Zoom. Why do I need to be in the classroom? So I think there's this discussion about what's going to happen in the fall. Like, and we were having this discussion in my school today. Are we requiring the students to be on campus? Are we saying they can't be online if they want to be online? Or, what are the reasons why they're allowed to be online? So I think all of this is going to happen. And obviously there's an economic driver for this. And it depends on who you ask, right? So professors have an opinion on this. Some professors don't want to put themselves at risk, maybe if they're not vaccinated. But parents and students don't know why they're paying for the same for an online experience versus in-class experience, even if we've kind of seen that we can have really rich experiences online. It's kind of raised this whole economic issue. And there was a comment that, sorry, master students appreciate it more as being online because they can manage their time better.
Okay, thank you. That was a lot drinking from the fire hose, and I appreciate it. So Babu, one of the true pillars of building out I-Core and Lean Launchpad at scale, what's the Midwest perspective and the global perspective from your discussion?
Okay, so in our breakout room, we had participants from Australia, Canada, and US and other countries. And it was really interesting. So some of the challenges that they mentioned, so first of all, most of the institutions that were there, they talked about the hybrid approach, that they're definitely going to start with the hybrid approach. However, one individual did mention the high flex approach, the simultaneous online and hybrid approach. We didn't go into specifics, I'm going to Google that more and see what people are saying, but we really didn't discuss it. But the high flex approach of this simultaneous online and hybrid is definitely being considered by a couple of institutions. Speaking of the hybrid approach, some people or some individuals talked about the pros of online. So for example, you can have a guest speaker from anywhere in the world at any time, right? And then the quality of customer discovery, meaning that all the team members can participate, even if they're spread out. But we're also concerned about the quality of delivery, the quality of customer discovery that could occur online. So those are some of the concerns, the pros and cons. Speaking of in-class, the biggest concern is, once the students, if they really, and when they do come back to the classroom, how do we ensure that they're free of viruses or virus? Okay, so that's one of the biggest concerns. And the faculty member from Australia, Aisha, she mentioned something really different. So, and I wasn't totally aware of this. So they were initially under lockdown, then they opened up, and now they are locked down again. And she is very much concerned about this constant change, transitioning back and forth. How do you maintain quality of the curriculum, the quality of delivery, everything? So there are many concerns to, transitioning back and forth. And the other concern about the hybrid approach was, how and what do we develop for online courses, and how and what do we develop for in-classroom activities? So those were essentially the topics that we...
about the classroom process.
Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you. Victoria from Toronto. What was your
Hi,
room?
Jerry.
Hi.
We had a great room like others. We had people from all over the world, Africa, Finland. I wasn't the only one from Canada, and of course across the US. We started conversation by talking about the fall and what people's situations were that they're facing. So of course, some people on the line are already back 100% on campus, and talked a little bit about the transition that entailed, going from being online back to the classroom. And there's a fair amount that instructors are dealing with on that front. But then others said, yeah, we're back 100%, but we've also been told to be prepared for all eventualities and to pivot. And so there's a lot of uncertainty around what that might entail and all the work to be prepared for any eventuality. So we had a good discussion around that. We then talked a lot about delivery. So, at the start of the pandemic, no one had time to prepare for anything. Everyone just got online. And so, people are still trying to figure out what is the best way to do things and how do we improve. And for those institutions that are really looking at hybrid delivery, how best to do that and to refine your teaching skills, because that's a unique delivery mode. So there's still a lot of concern around that. We also talked about different tools that people are using and what's worked well and whatnot. And I know that was the subject of previous summit discussions, so I won't go into that. We also had a number of people talk about how they're having to deal with the different teaching philosophies of their colleagues, and how, that while they themselves are really embracing, all the benefits of doing at least some of the activity online, they have colleagues who just can't wait to go back to the way that things were, and kind of ignore perhaps some of the benefits. So people were, making comments about that, and I sensed some frustration there. So I think, in their professional lives, kind of dealing with a lot of different pressures that under normal circumstances you wouldn't be dealing with. We then had a good discussion around Laura Tyson's points that she made, and it really focused on the social entrepreneurship and resources that are available to kind of guide what people might do in that regard. So we had a good discussion around that. And also her points around the interdisciplinary side of things and ways in which to make that work and build multidisciplinary teams or interdisciplinary teams, and also how you might work with others across campus to gain those benefits.
Well, I hope there's some specific recommendations that come out of that you'll be able to share with us when we put our notes
You
together?
know what, Jerry, there's a lot of questions. It was a great discussion, but I think maybe some needs there in terms of pointing to best practices, but I'll definitely give all the details in my report.
Oh, that's super. Philip, but Phil Bouchard, you're gonna have all the answers, right, on how to do all these things. I mean, you've got your great blog that has all the answers. What did you learn in your discussion group?
Well, one of the things that I found fascinating was the applicability of the lean approach and lean teaching. There was one example of teaching lean very successfully to fourth graders. So that's a whole new market for leans.
There you go.
And also to retirees who are, looking to have a side hustle, which is also a different scale of business, certainly.
Which is very much aligned with Pete's comments.
Yeah. There was one great comment of using COVID itself and the impact of COVID for teaching entrepreneurs that they need to always be prepared for the unknown and all the changes. There's the impact of COVID, but just use it as a teaching tool. We talked a lot about, needs, difficulties, and challenges, and specifically around developing multidisciplinary teams. I know this has been touched on about, all engineer teams or all business school teams, and the challenges of expanding to a new set of university partners. So, this is something that these were initiatives that the participants are going to be working on. There's also the need to listen to students in terms of, get their perspective and point of view on sustainability. And in terms of successful teaching, real relevant problems are more motivating than the contrived problems. And then, there was also a difficulty in adjusting to teaching about the scale of social impact initiatives. How do you present non-scalable businesses? One initiative that is in that area is, providing the resources and enabling students to connect with mission-driven companies through internships. So, there was a lot of different ideas floating around, and I look forward to consolidating them.
That's super. Thank you very much. Hey, Mike, I started in your classroom by stepping on some of your lines there. So how did it go from there?
It actually went very well. We had a very diverse group, including folks from all over the U.S. as well as a gentleman from Australia. We focused on the two questions, and let me just provide some quick notes from that. In terms of Laura's chat, one of the key things people focused in on was Laura's point, which around what are we doing to differentiate classroom learning from online and the competitive threat of that. And, as faculty, how are you thinking about that? Our groups thought participative learning, hybrid active learning will be key going forward in that from a differentiation perspective. But the overall feeling was the bar is being raised for in-classroom learning. And as faculty, you need to be aware of that and need to be thinking about what does that mean? Which relates to the second question, which is, which we'll talk about in a second, and sort of how people are thinking about that. We had a good discussion on impact entrepreneurship, and a key point that was made is that impact entrepreneurship, what it means is being redefined by both students and faculty, and in many ways being driven more by students than faculty. But faculty are open-minded towards it and wanting to sort of rethink it based on what today's student is asking for. In regards to Laura's point about Main Street, we had a faculty member who's teaching in Southern Texas, and where that's key. And a point that came out is Main Street is as important as Tech Street. And scalability, which has been a key focus of a lot of entrepreneurs and those who finance early stage companies, needs to be refined. And that sometimes what a scalable business really is, and whether it's a scalable business and a good business, are not necessarily two different things. As relates to thinking about the fall semester and challenges and things along those lines, I think the overall opinion of our group was that hybrid is here to stay. Prototyping was one area that was highlighted that is a key value add for classroom learning, and that especially access to the prototyping facilities on campus and the students not having that did really impact students this past year. Everyone's highlighted, of course, we did the importance of cross-discipline classes. But the last point here was, which was a general statement made by some of our faculty team members, is that they were hoping their faculty peers had gained new teaching approach learnings through the past year and a half that they will continue to apply and not just go back to what they were doing when they were in classroom last time. And that hopefully in instructional pedagogy will be better going forward, not only on their behalf, but among their peers.
Fantastic. They're very good. Thank you very much, Mike. Azel.
Hi, everyone. So we have very interesting discussion. Oh, sorry, the alarm just started sounding here. We have very interesting discussion. We had people from all over the place. We have people from England, different parts of the United States, from Hawaii, Canada, Egypt, Portugal, and Mexico. We started the discussion around the online education or non-university based education, and how is impacting traditional education, university education. And one of the things that came out is that university needs to update the way we teach. We need to move into something more practical, especially when doing entrepreneurship, which is very, very practical. One of the aspects that we discussed is about online might be counterproductive to entrepreneurship process. That we started seeing this idea because entrepreneurship is about doing. We require human interaction for entrepreneurship learning. We have knowledge and skills, and it's difficult to transfer the skills only on an online session, and especially if it's asynchronous, an asynchronous session. However, the students learn differently, and some of the students, especially newer generations, might be okay by doing online learning.
So, Azel, a question for you. You're looking at building out the program at Tech de Monterrey Engineering School. Anything in the discussion of your peer group resonates strongly for you and Mexico City at Tech de Monterrey?
Well, yes, this aspect about being very practical and not just talking about the processes and talking about the methods, but getting the students to run the process, to experiment entrepreneurship. There was one discussion about how the year in which the students should start doing entrepreneurship. And it was very interesting how some universities were doing entrepreneurship in the later years, and they were pushing to change it, to have it from the very first years, and then allowing the students to take the courses that they need to complete entrepreneurship. Like now it makes sense for them to do marketing, product development, finances. I thought that was really, really interesting, that approach. Something very interesting as well.
Good. I wanted to make sure that the discussion you had was relevant for you as well, because you have such challenges ahead of you.
Absolutely, very, very, very relevant.
Fantastic. A final thought before we move on?
That we need to update learning in universities, and we are close to going back to the classroom, and definitely is not going to be the same with what we have learned with the online tools. We believe that some of these new experiences, online experiences like recording video, having pre-recorded sessions, will remain and change the way we do lectures once we are back.
Very good. Thank you very much. Andre, please.
So, hi, thanks so much for the invitation. This is actually my first event post NSF. So just finished up there last week. So in our breakout, we had stakeholders who were educators from high school, They were from large universities, small universities, an international university in India, and a university spin out from Ontario. Our discussion really distilled down into three major themes: returning to the classroom, articulating value of entrepreneurial education, and business and engineering school collaboration. So with regard to returning to the classroom, there was a discussion about bringing back the joy of the classroom and making sure it's a high value experience, especially with expectations changing regarding the need to even show up to the classroom. The last thing you want to do in a classroom nowadays is lecture, because you can do that online. And that kind of follows Michael Morosco's comment on the bar really being raised for the classroom. Another interesting comment was the classroom is important to avoid isolation of the students. Undergrads may have social interactions, but graduate students really need this engagement. And also, it wasn't one-sided with regard to virtual needing to be in person. Virtual format does have some benefits. Of course, office hours are so much more convenient there. And so really leveraging the virtual format where it makes sense and making sure that you're using the classroom to its benefit. With regard to articulating the value of entrepreneurial education, I'll just provide one highlight, or one or two, that really the vocabulary needs to change from business speak. There needs to be a lightweight introduction to programs and to change the narrative around entrepreneurship from kind of an economic or monetary focus to connecting people with needs to the things that they need. And just one comment about business and engineering school collaboration. A number of our participants thought that was really important to connect these engineering communities with the business or law or medical communities. And even if the people that were meeting in an advisory board or some other kind of group didn't think they needed to be there, once you start talking about the problems of these ventures, I think different stakeholders from business school, engineering school, med school will understand some of these challenges and realize that their skill sets are relevant to entrepreneurship.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Ivy, I understand you're nominating Philippe. So Philippe, would you come forward?
Yes. Hi, my name is Felipe Massa. I'm from Loyola University in New Orleans, and I'll be Ivy for now. She did a great job moderating our group, and we had a lot of discussion with some very interesting people, both within academia and outside of academia. We focused on two main challenges. The first was how to be prepared for the new normal next year, and beyond that, what does it look like in the future? And then teaching social, or I love the term impact entrepreneurship as well. So the first challenge about being prepared for the new normal, we actually went a little deeper into some best practices that some of us have been using small group interactions to avoid the black screen problem that a lot of us have in the classroom, right? Where people just slowly over the semester start disappearing into black screens and we lose touch with people. More asynchronous communication through tools like Slack. We also talked about badging or giving people kudos on the spot for good comments using some new software that's out there, as well as some new roles that are coming up in the classroom, like Zoom teaching assistants that act as interlocutors in high flex classrooms. So having somebody there translating what's happening in the chat room to you as you lecture on stage is becoming important. There's also this idea of having superstar educators, TED talkers, and facilitators in the same classroom, co-teaching and working together to make this work. I think a lot of the schools are going towards high flex so that they can make more money, right, by having online and offline in the same room. So that's going to become important to not just try to adapt what we're doing now, but to think about new roles. Steve Fogel made an excellent comment about the important thing that's been true in the past and that's true now is that students have to remain active in their own education, and that we have to increase the value of interactions that students get at the university, even if they are online. So that's important. Then we switched to a little bit to talking about social entrepreneurship and the importance of social entrepreneurship to schools that don't have engineering, in particular for outreach outside of business and how that's appealing to liberal arts students, to have social as a tool for incorporating people into the lean philosophy and all these kinds of things.
Thank you very much. A final thought, Philippe?
That, you know, a lot of people have had issues with HiFlex and Zoom, but we just need to rethink it from the ground up instead of thinking about it as adapting to something that we have to do temporarily.
Excellent.
Thank
So
you.
in respect to everybody, thank you very much, Philippe. In respect to everybody's time, I'm going to ask going forward the last speakers to keep to the time limit. We're up against it. So Jim.
Yeah, so we had diversity of talent speaking in the room. We had instructors from BYU, MIT, and we also had someone from Australia, which gave us the added benefit that it's already tomorrow there. So we already know the future. So Jamie helped us see that. Virtual culture, the hybrid world, we talked a lot about that. One of Laura's comments about the hybrid lifestyle. It seems there's a sense and expectation that we could do something that I think Russ mentioned this about speed dating. Lots of quick little interviews to understand the problem identification will continue. The opportunity in the virtual culture of understanding, excuse me, that it's not just the ritual of doing 100 interviews does not yield a unicorn, but in fact, it's the engagement. And so what we've got now in this hybrid world is we can enhance the types of mentors, process mentors, domain mentors, tech mentors, but also improve the diversity. We spent a lot of time talking about diversity. Jerry, in our class, we had more women mentors this year than ever because they didn't have to be in the Bay Area. So I think there's a diversity quotient about enhancing the insights, including the micro engagements from your peers. Laura's third point about AI and business models, I think, is understanding the metrics underlying what we're trying to do in the classroom and to become better at understanding what that means. I think, you know, in total agreement with, I think, Steve Blank's comments about entrepreneurs or artists, we want to do more than an art appreciation course. We're not just trying to do innovation theater, but you learn a lot. And I think the magic that we talked about in our room was the pattern recognition that we bring into a classroom is what helps the teams in their pattern acquisition portfolio make progress, whether it's a mission-driven entrepreneur or some other use of technology. So the use of virtual guest speakers will continue. I can imagine, Jerry, a few years ago, if we had a video guest speaker, the students would have said, why? You know, we're not important enough. Now we have great diversity of talent, and I think Hacking for Defense proved how effective that can be. And with respect to time, I'm going to yield to the rest of our peers here because there's lots of other great ideas that need to be shared.
Super, Jim. Thank you so much. Ariella.
And so I'll keep this to time. I'm actually not from UrbanX. I'm from the New York City Regional Innovation Node, the New York I-Core node. But it makes sense in my room of 10 people, we had actually 6 people who are I-Core educators or Lean Launchpad educators to a wide variety across the country. So I'm going to try to focus on 2 major things that weren't discussed really. And one is around the student and faculty participation. So do students still value the university experience, or that now there's a culture shift of different models of learning? And we're seeing different ways of interacting with that. But we had a college student, Nicole, weigh in that actually this might be a new time for vigor of academics, and it's time to jump on that and really spur some entrepreneurship from there. So on that, with the general changes to participations, we wanted to say some solutions in reducing the barriers to entry has seen fruitful in the virtual climate, that there are now ways to change team formations or using co-location. One cool thing I want to highlight that Sam brought up, Saidan, was that using not necessarily losers or not the winners of entrepreneurship competitions are great ways to funnel in students to train up. And a lot of this discussion has been, how do we spur different kinds of interdisciplinary startups or different the different kinds of leaders, more person-centric, and so really pushing the training of entrepreneurs. And lastly, there's no going back pre-COVID, which is okay. It's a time to rebuild our infrastructure. But as everyone mentioned, with looking at our content and changing how we deliver and changing a little bit of some of the terminology, the language, we have a strong message from Room 18 to please do your own customer discovery with our students and with entrepreneurs to really validate what they need moving forward in addressing the fall challenges.
That's
So
a
that's
great message. That's a great message. Thank you. And a challenge to all of us. Jim.
Great. Yes. My room was made up primarily of distinguished professors at American universities. We also even had one engineering school dean. We had one participant from Turkey and one who was a journalist originally who interviewed Steve Blank back in 2012, which turned him on to the lean startup approach. Our room really focused on what the challenges are of returning to in-person from the virtual environment. Everyone, even the professor who has only taught virtually, agreed that teaching in person is a better mode of teaching. The students have experienced, burnout with virtual mode. Self-regulate, the way that one professor put it, self-regulation by students in the virtual environment is difficult because they tend to be multitasking and they're not dedicated in that moment to focusing on what's being taught. So one thing that we really focused on is, how do we help the students engage with the community again after they're coming out of hibernation almost, right? The professor who's only taught virtually, it was interesting to his perspective because there was no change in the mode of teaching, but there was a huge change, of course, in the way the students were able to engage with the course because they weren't able to engage with the community, and especially with the lean startup approach, that made it very difficult. So the solution there is to try to facilitate those student interactions with each other, with customers, do some more hand-holding. MIT has a program that is called Making Connections or something. I don't remember the name. At GW, we're making much more intensive use of mentors to make sure that the students are being able to engage more. We are, there was also some concern about in this virtual environment, there's a lot of new programs that are being launched, maybe outside the university. There's issue with quality control. How do we make sure that we're not getting, just these programs that don't really know what they're doing? So how do we do some more of that? Is there, no one mentioned this, it's one of my days, maybe there's some kind of certification, but there's, more of this kind of best practices sharing, making sure we're creating complementary programs versus competitive programs and we're not cannibalizing ourselves. And one really nice tip I learned that I'm going to try to do is this idea of using video pitches for recruiting. So apparently this professor said that when they started using video pitches, they were able to recruit a more diverse group of students because they weren't intimidated by going live in front of judges, but they could prepare a video pitch and it wasn't so intimidating. So that was one thing that a really cool thing I learned.
New idea. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Jim. Todd.
Thanks, Jerry. All right, so my group had a lot of comments and thoughts which were similar to what you've heard before, so I'm going to skip those, although it's in the slide I provided to you. So I'm just going to rough out the couple of things that were, I think, interesting. We took sort of a philosophical bent, which is probably my fault. But one of the points that came up is that we keep talking about entrepreneurship and we talk about innovation and we talk about social impact or we talk about impact, whatever we want to call it. Arguably, what we're doing is we are providing a liberal arts course to people historically who are not big liberal arts supporters. I'm picking on engineers and scientists. So although it started as how to make your company successful, and it's evolved into how to make your organization successful, it has ended up being arguably how do you learn yourself? How do you learn about yourself? How do you learn to be a communicator, a team member, et cetera, et cetera. And so again, this is philosophy rather than actionable, but I think it's an interesting question. What's the name of this thing that we're doing? Because it's not just about starting enterprises, it's way more than that. And in I-Corps, for example, one of the things you see is it's the best language program people have ever taken. So you come to the US as a graduate student, English is not your first language. At the end of I-Corps, holy Toledo, you can talk. The second thing is we're teaching a series of both macro behaviors like critical thinking and hypothesis testing and falsification and asking questions and communication and working with others. We're also teaching a lot of micro behaviors. Tiny little things like, is that what the customer interview really said? Or, you've heard this 3 times, does that allow you to draw a conclusion? Or that doesn't seem to square with what you said last week, and things like that. Where is that list? What is the list of things that we're trying to teach? And should we create one around the micro, both the macro as well as the micro behaviors across all fora? And I'll shut up after this one. This concept applies not just to entrepreneurship and social entrepreneurship, it applies to all of the things people are chatting about, teaching it to 4th graders, teaching it to old folks like myself, teaching it to undergraduates, and teaching to everybody else. Okay.
So I think it can be captured, and I'm going to offer this as a buzzword to capture the thoughts. I think it needs to be further developed and documented, but is venture-centric versus person-centric entrepreneurship education. And if you're person-centric, it's about skill building and all the things you're discussing. And I think that's a way to frame the discussion so that we see one versus the other. They're complementary, but they're different. Chris, you get to take us home.
Thanks. Our group was wildly diverse and very active. Lots of people had a lot of things to say. With regard to Dr. Tyson's chat, one of the things that we started with, and you would imagine because it's what she started with, really was the government's role in creating jobs, for instance, versus businesses' goal in creating jobs. And there were varied opinions about the strength of each doing so, and whether or not, how do we measure it together, et cetera. This not an unusual conversation when you bring this sort of stuff up. I did point out to them, because we use it in another class of mine, Mariana Mazzucato's book, The Entrepreneurial State, if other people are interested in it. It's a very great book that talks about the power of the state to create markets, let alone just influence them.
You can put that in the chat after the session.
Sure. Very adamant, all of them. Higher education is not stale. A few folks highlighted that at their universities, they can go see their deans, talk about changes they want to make, and they're done, in semester, the next semester, but well within the year. And that perhaps the narrative that surrounds higher education being stale is from people who were in higher education 30 years ago and haven't been to it today. That maybe there's a way for us to combat that narrative going forward. So I thought that was very good. The private partners, public-private partnerships are very important. Was very important to this group, and I agree. It's about sustainability. One group or the other isn't going to be able to sustain everything against all the myriad problems we face. And I thought it was a great chat about that. One of our faculty members brought up, before there was venture capital, it was really the choice between debt financing or government dollars. And I did highlight Steve Blank's presentation from some years ago about the secret history of Silicon Valley on YouTube. I think people would get a lot out of watching that video. Again, a holistic approach to the lean approach. And this goes to really, Pete Newell particularly will hammer away at this at his talks, is that start with a problem first that affects many people, and you will naturally, through the course of trying to solve it and solving it, bring your finance partners along, your business partners along, what have you. Instead of it only being just an educational experience for folks, there's start with the problem that affects lots of people, and we will bring other people along very well. Syncing the schools was a big point. Having business schools and engineering schools working together. I need to give a shout out to Jim Chung at GWU, who he and I and others at GW have been working together to bring the Hacking for Defense class to GW. I think we're going to do that in spring. But if not for Jim sort of answering my onslaught of emails and really being a great partner in all this, we would have taken them much longer. So Jim's done a fantastic job.
And the final point?
And the final point is that really smart people who learn things really well can learn different models, and we should attract those people as instructors and champions. I think this was going to the point of having our boomers participate in everything. Wonderful discussion. Everybody's going to knock it out of the park.
Fantastic. So thank you for all that. Thank you to all the group report. Thank you to all the group leaders. A lot of this success of this summit depended on your leadership right there in summaries. So to bring us home, let's look to our co-hosts for the lessons learned, overarching messages for the day and motivation for the future. Steve, can I ask you to lead off?
Sure, thanks, Jerry. I'll keep it brief. I think the biggest lesson for now this fourth educator conference is that there is a international community of birds of a feather who've kind of adopted and are now teaching and spreading the best practices of using lean as a methodology in a variety of areas, most of which I never would have even imagined when we started thinking about putting the methodology together and then first teaching the classes. Just amazing to see and amazing to watch how this group has made my small efforts much bigger and larger and certainly much better than I ever imagined. So thank all of you and hope to see you again in December.
Pete, thank you, Steve. Pete. Oh, and professional Steve Weinstein, are you back in the room? I know you had to step out. No, go to Pete. Thank you very much. Pete.
So I would just would reiterate first Steve's comments that it's fantastic to see this body of discussion spill over not just the U.S. North America boundaries, but we're starting to touch on multiple disciplines of lean education. And now getting past not just the disciplines, but we're starting to talk about the actual problems. And I'll say it over it again. I'm hugely problem centric, and I see some of the the large problems we face in the world of making it a better, safer place. So it's everything from harnessing an aging population to solving homelessness to building back more resilient small towns and cities around the world who are trying to recover from COVID. There's so many topics that we can take on with a body like this. So I think it's fantastic to have the opportunity. I'll put in a shameless plug for the Slack channel. We've posted it a couple times, and I'm sure Emily will do it again. But there are about 580 of us on this Lean Innovation Educators Slack channel that continue this discussion constantly. It's turned out to be a great place to share and keep the dialogue going. Thanks, Jerry.
Sure. I will close by simply expressing my appreciation. I think the content does not need restating. It's gone from the global to the particular, from the general to the specific. And we've addressed the challenges economically, socially, societally, politically, even in a subtle way. And we've addressed solutions and approaches that can come bottom up by leveraging our students' energy and creativity. In terms of continuing this discussion, formally, we'll get together again on December 2nd. And you might put that tentative date down on your calendar. We will, as Pete pointed out, continue the conversation on the Slack channel. And further, we're having, thanks to the leadership of Emily McMahon, we're having periodic discussions that are not regularly scheduled, but if you're on the Slack channel, you'll be communicated with about opportunities to have further small group discussions. These are just episodic groups of 10 or 15 colleagues who will get together around a topic and have a moderated discussion. There'll be no content provided. It'll be up for you to just share time and space for those of you that want further input from colleagues. Tell us what you want what you think about this program, about the importance of it, the relevance of it to you. We want your feedback. We want this to be a relevant program. We want bottoms-up leadership and input. To stimulate that, thank you to the Common Mission Project for donating the Amazon gift cards that are going to be raffled off. There'll be a couple gift cards. If this is like the vaccination, you know, for the few of you that aren't responding, you know, to stimulate your response, there'll be a raffle for all the participants in the Summit Feedback Survey. And the link will be sent to you through email, but here it is. You'll be all receiving an email with a PowerPoint of the slides, and all the links will be in there. The Summit actual recording will be up and live by midday tomorrow. And so if you have colleagues that would benefit from having participated but couldn't be here, you can certainly share it with them through social media. So again, thank you to our organizers and sponsors, first and foremost to the Common Mission Project and Logan, Emily, and Nicole, the core team that really made this possible. As you continue in this community, you'll get to know these individuals personally because you'll interact with them and you'll see the quality, responsibility, professionalism, and brilliance of these individuals and how they make this all work for us. And thank you to the GCEC, the Global Consortium for Entrepreneurship Centers, and to VentureWell for their assisting with the marketing outreach and community building. We all share this community in common, and we appreciate their support. So as we come to a close, my personal thank you. This is a mission for me that's a personal mission, the community of educators and fostering global solutions through fostering the creativity of individuals and teams that we mentor, teach, and guide. See you all again December 2nd, if not before. Thank you very much.